Welcome to this episode of the Comedy Defect podcast. My name is Winter, I'm a comedian, and this is my show. Those that are new to the show, welcome. Those that are old to the show, thanks for coming back, guys. This episode is with an individual that seems to have lived 2 lifetimes, because she's directed over 100 shows. She's performed to, I said 2,000 in the outro last month. She's performed to over 6,000 people at once. And she has been in a girl band. Let's not bury the lead here, but like, she has done an awful lot. And I wanted to talk to this individual about narrative, because she's directed so many shows. So I think that comedians need to know how to structure their stuff, essentially. I mean, we all have a natural kind of, I guess, a loose idea of structure, beginning, middle, of end. That's what happens in life anyway. But I guess that, it's always handy to kind of structure something a little bit better. And Rachel Creeger, who the comedian I'm going to be speaking to in the next hour or so, will probably help you do that. She's directed some award-winning shows and an excellent person to be on a bill with, very good comedian, and will certainly enjoy the hour or so I spent with her. She's on all the socials as Rachel Creeger, and she is there at Rach Creeger. It's RACHCREEGER, and her website is rachelcreeger.com. That's RACHELCREEGER.com. Rachel also co-hosts a podcast with Philip Simon, another brilliant comedian, called You Talking to Me. And you can find that where you get all your good podcasts from. You can also follow me. I'm on Instagram at Winter Dominus. If you want to find me everywhere, it's Winter Phonander. I'm everywhere with both names to confuse everybody. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok as at Winter Dominus. That's WINTERDOMINUS. And you can find the Comedy Defect Facebook page. You can go like that, and you can join the Comedy Defect podcast Facebook group. And I'll just post the podcast links there, and also links to gigs I've got coming up, because I'm doing previews about breaking my legs. And there's some great jokes in there, as I say. I can't wait to do this show because it's a lot of pain. It's about a lot of pain. So it's going to be a good show. But anyway, look, so you can find all that stuff there. And if you like this podcast enough and you want to buy me a coffee, you don't have to. But if you want to go to Patreon, type in the Comedy Defect Podcast and donate as much as you feel this podcast is worth. And if you can't donate, that's all right. Just tell your friends about your favorite episode, because it tells people where we are and what we're up to. But if you don't do that, don't worry about it. There's enough work in the world to do. So look, without further ado, this is episode 113 with the excellent comedian and joke writer, podcaster, we'll get into what else she does in this episode, Rachel Creeger. Enjoy. Rachel Creeger, thank you so much for taking your time to spend with me for the next hour on the Comedy Defect. How are you getting on?
Yeah, getting on good, thank you. I was sitting here with a cold glass of water and a hot drink, so that hopefully I won't cough too much during the recording, but I feel like I'm as prepared as a person can be.
I met you a few gigs in the last few years, and I didn't realise who I was in the presence of, because I read your website. I was like, oh my God, I am not busy at all. You look like you are been absolutely, you just don't, do you sleep at all? I mean, okay, we'll start off, right? You've been directed nearly, it looks like, I'm going to take a stab at this, over 70 shows, is that right?
Yeah, probably 50, 60 shows over the years. Well, but in fairness, because you said, do you ever sleep? And I don't sleep very much. Right. That's the truth of it. I've got quite bad insomnia and other things, so I don't sleep that much. So I have managed to pack a lot in.
Brilliant. So you're living 2 lives nearly. Wow.
Yeah, by day I'm this and by night I'm that. I'm a superhero.
Amazing. So what would be your superhero name?
I'll have to think about that one.
That's right.
My superhero name. I think Ultimate Jewish Mother. There must be some kind of superhero name we can make out of that.
This works. So, and your special powers would be?
My special powers would be knowing everything about everything and being able to give you advice no matter what you ask me. Being able to create food out of whatever happens to be in my vicinity. Nurturing people to death, I guess. Like, that would be, if I came up against a villain, how I'd get rid of them. I just love them till they died.
Finishing move. I love it. That's great. like the Jewish Thanos, yeah? with edibles like that. That's nice.
Good edibles and good hair.
Nice. I love your pictures as well on your website. They're brilliant. They're great. They're absolutely, I mean, insomnia, geez, you never even know. God almighty, you look great in these pictures. I'm so jealous. Was it, and so what have you been doing during lockdown to kind of keep you sane?
Well, I don't know that any of us are sane anymore, to be honest. It's been really hard. And I just was saying to someone earlier, I don't know if I'm ever going to recover from that first 72 hours of everything falling apart in the country, which was just before lockdown, where all my year's work to be disappeared overnight. And it was honestly so shocking because this year, or rather 2020 and 2021, I had a pretty full diary and I was really psyched about it. And it felt like things were quite stable in terms of there was going to be money coming in and I had exciting projects and it was all brilliant. And then I had this honestly 72-hour window where everything just disappeared because of the pandemic. And it felt like when you're watching, you watch like a sci-fi movie and the power goes down on the ship and they're sitting like at the front of the spaceship or whatever it is and the panel of lights will go out like ka-chung, one panel at a time. That's what my Google Calendar looked like. It was sort of just disappeared. My tour disappeared. I was supposed to then travel abroad. All that went, and it was horrendous. So I set up a podcast with Philip Simon, who we both know, based off a chat that we'd been having on and off for a really long time about how we'd like to do a Jewish chat show that wasn't just for the Jews, like it was for everybody. Cool. And quite early on in lockdown, we realised that this would be a sensible way of being occupied with something really constructive. And we're both lucky in that we have spouses whose jobs were maintained throughout this period. So we had a basic roof over our head scenario without us having to earn the money we were earning before, as long as we stayed in and didn't have takeaways and didn't which you couldn't have anyway, couldn't go out anyway, couldn't travel anywhere. So our costs were very reduced. So we thought, let's invest this time into creating something. So we created Jew Talking to Me, our podcast, where we interviewed people who are of Jewish ethnicity. You can argue that like the BBC if you want, but who have Jewish origins but work across the entertainment and media sectors. It's been really interesting. We've had some amazing names on the show, but also we've learned so much. We've developed in terms of being able to be presenters and we've made new contacts and we've had to learn different ways of scripting. And we've got a brilliant producer called Russell Balkins who's helped us so much in terms of structure, and writing jokes that are just for every single episode has been a good discipline. So I think we've done 2 series. We're just working now on the 3rd. That has been honestly a lifesaver because it's given both of us, but I can say for myself, it's given me like a focus, something to get on with, something to be proud of. I've had obviously online gigs and things like that here and there, but that felt like almost having like a full-time job, but doing comedy, if that makes sense. Yeah, totally. That's great. So you've been busy and it gave you the focus to stop from getting kind of down about the situation of losing all the work, at least, something to throw yourself into some sort of occupation. And I've got a teenager at home as well. Right. So, we've had homeschooling to an extent, although not like with a primary school kids where you've got to sit over them and do their maths with them. I haven't been able to help him with his maths for about 10 years. So we've got a GCSE age child who has been going through their own difficulties with everything that's been going on with exams, and then our older son who was due to get married last November and brought it forward to the last summer because they were pretty sure that, and they were right to guess this because that's how it turned out, that weddings would be cancelled by the time theirs was due to happen. So we had a teeny weeny little COVID wedding and I'm now a mother-in-law. It's been a big change. Is it great, the mother-in-law thing? Is it you have to do it via Zoom now? It's great because she's great. So we have a really lovely relationship. Excellent. I'm very lucky. And she's got a great sense of humour, which I think has helped in dealing with this whole very complicated situation. And putting together weddings can be quite fraught as a general rule. But we didn't have any of that. We didn't have arguments. There was no anxiety. There's no whatever, because everything was quite restricted. In a way, it made it much simpler. You could only have a little ceremony. You could only have like a small number of people to eat together at that point. That was last September. So just before you stopped being able to have people in a restaurant, you could have a small number of people in a restaurant socially distanced. So they had some kind of celebration, reception, and they had some kind of, it took away all the annoying bitching and arguing that lots of people have. So that was a nice thing. But but we WhatsApp and we're on Zoom, and they live not too far away. So occasionally I drop off a food parcel and we wave from afar at each other.
Nice.
So.
And like, was it myself and my wife got married in one of the Greek islands? So we had only a small wedding as well. So we kind of did the isolation thing before it was kind of required, I guess. But it did make things a lot easier as well, for sure.
And Jewish weddings are usually enormous, like hundreds of people, and it can be quite overwhelming. So the sad thing is not to have all the people that you love there, but the positive is you didn't have to have all the obligation people.
True. The neighbours of your friends. Yeah,
exactly.
That's it. The people who just like met you once, who are like, oh no, you're having a wedding, I'll be there too. Oh, why?
Whoever you are.
Constantly trying to do the detective work of figuring out who the hell is this person. Yeah, that's great. There's another one. But so that sounds like you a pretty full on kind of like things to kind of keep you entertained and occupied during the lockdown then. And so you were going to tour your show. What was your show? Was it Hinani?
Hinani, good effort there. No, that's fine. I'm very impressed by you making that effort. That's lovely. So my show Hinani, which was my 2019 Edinburgh show, was supposed to tour the UK. And obviously I did the warm-up show for it, which was nice. And then there was a coronavirus and there was no more. Also, I was supposed to go to America and perform my previous show, It's No Job for a Nice Jewish Girl, there, and do a few other things in different countries. And then the idea was that then this year, whatever the year is now, 2021, I was going to tour that show, It's No Job for a Nice Jewish Girl, in America, and do Hinani in Israel, and then the year after do the Australian festivals and New Zealand. So it had like a whole long game plan. Who knows? Like, hopefully that will all still come to pass eventually. But it feels a bit like with Hinani, I worked so hard on that show and then it disappeared. And you always worry that it's kind of lost its moment, like it's missed its moment. But I guess rewrites, whatever. And actually I did another show since then because I already had a show half written for last summer's Edinburgh Festival. So I already had for the Fringe a new show called Pray It Forward, which I did a few previews of online. It was a kind of follow-up to Hinani. So maybe I'll end up putting them together as one mega show then get it out of my system and then do something different. I
think I saw a preview for your Hinani, Paul's gig in Cambridge, Outer Hebrides sort of thing of Cambridge.
I can't remember if it was that show or the previous one, but it is possible that it was that one.
You had a lovely joke.
Yeah, no, I think it was. I think you're right. I think it was Hinani, when it was still very much scraps of paper and question marks. Yeah. And is this funny? And then putting a big cross next to something. Yeah.
I love that.
Was very early on.
I love that. I won't watch the joke, but I love the joke about the apron strings, which is brilliant. I love that. You got to go see that, but it's great. It's great.
Thank you.
You've been so busy, like structure. You've been doing the podcast and you've been writing. You said you had someone to help you with the structure, but that seems to be like your thing. So what is the difference between the podcast structure and your, say, teaching someone to direct who you're going to direct their show and put basically trying to embed the structure for that person? What's the difference between a podcast and that?
Well, what an interesting question, Winter, actually. I have to give that a moment of thought. Yeah. Because I guess I've directed a lot of solo performances, like mainly stand-up, but also theatrical shows with casts. And I guess the difference is that with a theatre show, even if that's your stand-up, it's about looking at the story of it. I don't know if that's a difference, actually. And you're asking the person to look as an individual, I suppose, at their journey of the piece. So if it's a cast, then each member of the cast has to think about where their character is at the beginning and at the end and how they develop. And my directing style is very naturalistic, so it's not, and then you must sit on a chair and then you must stand up. Like, it's always about what is the natural thing for that person to do and how they would react based on what we know about them. Whereas I guess with the podcast, it's about how Philip and I first of all work together, which we've been working together for a long time. So we've got a friendship which allows us to be very relaxed with each other, and that's very helpful. But the aim is to bring the most interesting show to the listeners. So you want to bring out as much as possible from the guests to make it enlightening and entertaining, and to hear things, maybe stories that they haven't told elsewhere. Because some of the people we've had on the show are not known for their Jewish identity, they're known just for their work. So they've had the chance to tell stories that no one's ever asked them in like the Daily Telegraph or whoever has interviewed them. They're not really interested in that. I know that we had on Anthony Horowitz, the writer, and he said like that we asked him things that no journalist has ever asked, because they wouldn't think to ask him, you know, have you got a hilarious story around your Jewish food when you were growing up, or whatever it might be. And he was really very, very funny and very entertaining.
That's why I enjoy doing the podcast. Is like, I mean, it's comedy based, but I also like to spend like a bit of time kind of getting to know the person. That's what it is. You want to know the person after you've spoken to them, rather than just bore the hell out of the person with the same questions again and again, isn't it? I mean, don't worry, they will be coming later.
we do use questions, and we do have like some questions that are the same in all of ours, and some which are different. I've listened to yours as well, so quite a few of them. So I know your questions too.
Great.
But we have some, but they're really more the introduction of a topic, and we try and tailor the question to that guest. So sort of slightly change up how we phrase it. So for example, we always ask about, you know, there's that expression 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon.
Yes.
That comes from 6 degrees of separation, the idea that everyone is a maximum of 6 people apart.
Great.
And in fact, I think I'm 3 degrees of Kevin Bacon, if I'm honest. But we've got in our show a segment called 6 Degrees of Can't Eat Bacon. Obviously, it's a Jewish show.
Great.
And so we'll think of what connects us to the guests, and then we'll ask them about who's their most interesting connection. That's not just someone I've gigged with, or once I wrote something for somebody. It's got to be like a personal interaction. And that's always quite fun, because working out what our connection is to them is usually, you know, there's often a weird and interesting connection between any two people. We did have my aunt on. That was a bit more straightforward, because she's a music journalist and singer-songwriter, and, you know, I could just say she's my mum's sister. But we've had some very bizarre connections. We have quite a few people who went to the same primary school as me, just so happens. It's
very strange, that, isn't it? Like a homing pigeon instinct sort of thing. Like, oh, how obviously when you're in the class behind me, it's like you won't remember me. But that's so weird, isn't it? You just kind of get locked in your own world sometimes. I'm really interested to talk to you about structure, how you structure the show. Like, so, like, you know, without an individual in I don't know, maybe do an individual in mind, in your own mind. It doesn't, we don't have to name them, but like, how would you go, right, okay, I'm going to structure a show. What is the format that you potentially use for, you know, like to draw from?
I love working with writers because whatever they put together, and that includes a writer-performer, which I'm also one, whatever they put together is an extension of themselves, right? It's their story that they're prepared to put out there, even if the characters are fictional, even if they've researched it from a period of history or a country they've never been to, then it's still something of you that you're giving to the audience. So the structure kind of arises from that. What's the message? What do you want the audience to feel? What do you want them to go away with? What's the journey you want to take them on? And I think that's as true for a 5-minute comedy set as for anything else, because you have to kind of have in your head where you want to be with the audience. It's not an action in isolation. I don't really believe in the fourth wall, and I tend to break it a lot, even directing theatre. I tend to involve the audience, because it makes it a real experience for everybody in a very personal way. So I think that would be what I'd sit down with somebody initially to talk about. What's the journey that you want to yourself or your cast to go on? What's the journey you want your audience to go on? How can we look at how your script is going to make that happen? What's the arc going to be? And it doesn't mean, people always joke with solo comedy shows that at the 40-minute mark you have to have a dramatic moment. There is sort of some truth in that to an extent, because you want something to peak and then you want it to have either a resolution or specifically not to have a resolution, right? You know, that has to be, but it has to be an active choice. Everything about how the show pans out, I feel, should be an active choice. And your choice can be to leave something ambiguous or to leave something out or put something in. So that's kind of how we look at the structure. It's beginning, middle and end, but it's beginning, middle and end, like as if I was traveling from A to B, and B could be back to my home, which is a very comedic thing, is that the end of your show brings people right back to the beginning of your show.
That's it, the loop. And to wrap up, essentially a joke, like a there's not necessarily a narrative, but if there was a comedian who was like a gag-based comedian, would you direct that too?
I haven't directed anyone who's just, say, like a one-liner act. I haven't done that, but I have worked with people who are. So I haven't directed a whole show, but I have worked with one-liner comedians. And I'd say that for a set of any length or a whole show, the ones that I've seen that are most successful and the ones that I've supported who've been successful in terms of helping them with bits here and there have been the ones who still incorporate a narrative in a way, even if it's only in their head. So, for example, putting jokes that are in some way connected to each other together, because I think for an audience hearing one-liner jokes, if they are scattergun, like a lot of different subjects, one after the other, it's quite hard to concentrate for more than about 15 minutes. So when you see someone do that, if they're closing a show and they do 15 minutes of what seems to be random subject one-liner jokes, that can still be hilarious. But if you had to sit for really a lot longer than that, it would be quite hard to focus on. To me, there always needs to be that journey, whatever it might be. And the journey can just be topical. And it doesn't have to. And I think if you have it in yourself, like what it is, then the audience doesn't necessarily have to have it spelled out to them. You don't have to say, so the first jokes are all about school and the second jokes are all about my wife and the third or whatever it is. They can have kind of a suggested connection that you feel. If you feel it's there, then the audience, I think, will feel it's there.
Yeah. I mean, like, it's just like, it's in like loads of bits that just gets fit together through just maybe association or like just like a jigsaw puzzle, isn't it really? It's like, oh, well, that's like, that's body. That's sort of the, if you're doing a show on, maybe injuries that you've had in the past, that's it. You go, okay, well, this is pain. Okay, this will work as a show. And then you kind of build it up like that sort of thing, so yeah.
Yeah, or even like, when you're at school and you have to memorize things in science and there was ways to, is it called acronyms, when you just take the first letter of each word and then try and make it into a sentence so that you're going to remember. I can't think what the word is for doing that. So it can be a little bit like that in your head, just so a memory trick. It might be something just as simple as if your first bit was about your kids and the next bit was to do with when you were at school. Even though it's not your kids at school, people will feel that association. I think I've been maybe a bit too literal there, but people will feel that association without you having to spell anything out. And it's always show, not tell, that's more successful as well, when the audience feels it themselves rather than you saying, and now I'm going to do X or Y.
Then I guess when you come to the end of the show, it's harder to do that rap at the end because, those bits are not necessarily joined. You could just finish on the best bit, hopefully that connects loosely to the last bit, isn't it?
Yeah. But I think that the shows I enjoy, and I'm not saying that you can't do this all obviously completely different ways because everyone has their own way of working. But I know that the shows that I enjoy the most have some kind of callback at the end, like the comedy shows, to something that happened earlier or something about the person, because then it feels like we're all in it together. And I think that's the beauty of comedy. I mean, that's the thing I love about comedy, is that it's different every single time. You can say the same words every time in different rooms with different audience. The vibe is different. It's always a new show, and it's always the show that experience for that specific audience and you is never repeatable, right? It's different every single time. That's, to me, that's so exciting. That's the fact that it can be terrible and it can be amazing is exciting, because you don't know when you step onto that stage or onto that upturned crate, whatever it might be, you don't know how it's going to. Sometimes upturned crate gigs are the best. Totally. You just have no idea how that's going to turn out. And that's so fascinating about our industry, the unpredictability. I guess I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie in a way. Like I don't want to jump out of an aeroplane, but I'm quite happy to see where talking to random strangers in a different place every day takes me and what that experience is. I sometimes, I don't think it's anywhere on my website, but when I compare or host, particularly if it's a big charity event or something like that, I live poet it. So I basically create a poem through the show based on what's happening, who says what, the subjects that the acts talk about, like if they speak to someone in the audience and they say something about themselves. And when when the show's over and the headliner's finished and I'm closing it as the compare, I close it with the poem of what happened on that night. Great. And it's a really fun thing to do. It's a sort of how my brain works, but it's a fun thing to do because the audience knows that that poem will never be relevant again anywhere ever. If I can't use it on my social media, no one will know why it's funny that Mary mentioned being a florist. No one will know. No one will care that the barman gave someone change at that moment or whatever it was that's in this poem. No one will care. It's only means something in that exact moment, and then it's gone. Like, you know,
there's something special about that. There's something really special, isn't there? It's like, because you're including them too, and you're like, you know, you're making it a special night for them that they won't ever forget, because then they're part of the show as well. They built that poem from their lives as well, isn't it? That's the thing. It's great. When I'm comparing as well, I don't do the poem, but I really love to just like, you know, make something up and just have fun with it and make a little bit of a joke with everyone and combined that you've spoken to in that night. You know what I mean? Like the you know, for specific jobs or how it worked out or what we can just like, you know, do for juxtaposing each of those jobs together, and that same sort of thing. It's so fun, and
it really matters to people.
Yes.
Like when you, like Winter, as you said, we've gigged together quite a bit on and off the last few years, and I've seen you host, and I think when you say at the end, and thank you to, you know, John the dentist, and you know, whatever, when you remember things about someone, it makes them feel really special. I work a lot with Funny Women, and which is a brilliant organisation, funnywomen.com, and they do lots of workshops for people about developing your comedy writing, developing your comedy skills. Some of them are sort of corporate and some of them are open to everybody. And one of the things that we often talk about is that people think we all have amazing memories because we refer back to people. And I was doing a workshop for them quite recently, and I said to the people that what I do is that I have a notepad at the side of the stage, and if I'm comparing, I come off stage and I write down Andrew, green shirt, football fan, or whatever it might be, that someone said to me, so that it does stay in my mind, because I really want to remember. Because when an audience member participates with you, that's a gift they're giving you to be part of the show. They can fold their arms and shut their mouth. They can walk out if they choose to engage with you, which I only ever do in like a friendly way. I'm never a picker on the audience and a aggressive way person. I think that it's a respectful thing to kind of remember that and to bring it up when it's relevant, not in a punching down way. And when you can thank them at the end and mention their names, I think that's respectful.
Totally. Yeah, you're showing that you they mattered. It wasn't just a
they made a contribution.
Them. Yeah.
Essentially, what you're doing is giving them their credit for appearing in the show.
Yeah, that's it. You've done your part. I'll just give a nod to you. That's great. You run your own gig as well. The Adam and Eve, is that right?
Well, who knows after this, but hopefully.
Have they said anything about moving up again?
Not at the moment. They've got, they're dealing with their own issues of whether the venue will be open and how that will survive. I hope that it does survive. It's a really loved pub in the area. It's really a special venue. So hopefully it will survive and then we'll be back. But I think we're not going to discuss it until things are a little bit clearer.
Of course.
It's been running a long time. I think the first time I ever ran a gig there was a charity one in a 2011 maybe, so 10 years ago. And then about a year or so after that, they said, would you come and do something regular? And since then, 11 months of the year, I think we've done shows there for professional acts to practice their new bits. And it's been an amazing journey for me in terms of my relationship with comedy, because when we started it, I was writing and directing it, but I was performing it in a kind of quite casual now and then-ish way. And mainly I would say I was performing in the Jewish community rather than anywhere near the circuit, but it was something I always wanted to do. I've been able, through having that gig, to watch brilliant acts as they develop their work and as they develop their careers, really, because we've had people who've come back across the years. And then once I started taking it a little bit more seriously, like I went full time for comedy in 2016, I still had access to all these amazing headliners and people who have loads of experience with TV and radio and whatever, to see them working through their new stuff and to work through my stuff in their company. And it's a huge privilege and a huge advantage in terms of how I've learned to be a stand-up. I've learned it from the proximity to all these people, and I don't ever forget that. I've been very, very lucky with that.
Yeah, that's it. It's just a privilege to be actually, talking to and rubbing shoulders with those people. And, you just get to see, your friends as you go on, like just improve and perform and get inspired by them too. It's just brilliant. I love that. You go every year, you go to the Fringe doing Diorama with, is it Philip Simon and Aaron Levine, is that right?
So again, that's their show.
Right.
I'm happy to take credit for my shows. But those aren't mine. So yeah, I'm just one of their regular people that rock up on their show. But yeah, Jewrama is a fun show because it's Jewish acts and one token non-Jewish act,
right?
And just doing their normal sets. But we're all from very diverse Jewish backgrounds, so it's an interesting thing. Like, I'm the only religious comedian who does circuit gigs at all. So I think I bring quite a different voice to even the Jewish gigs, really, because my background is different.
Is it because you're more Jewish, or is there is it because explain the difference, please?
I guess it's the people who are secular and people who are practicing in terms of the religion, because Judaism is a complicated thing. There's a religion, there's a culture and a heritage, there's an ethnicity. I mean, the fact that you can be DNA tested for your Jewish identity kind of shows that it's not just a religious thing.
Wow.
Because as far as I know, you don't get a DNA test results that says you're like 30% Mexican, 20% Christian, 50%. I can't do maths, but you can. But your tests would show if you were Ashkenazi or Sephardi Jewish, which is European or North African, Middle Eastern. So the difference is that I observe the religion in terms of my practice. So I'm Sabbath observant, so I don't work at all on Fridays from sunset till Saturdays at nightfall. So it's 25 hours of the week where I'm not online. I don't gig. I don't work at all. I don't travel anywhere. I observe all the different commandments that we have for Sabbath. So we eat special foods, we say special prayers, that kind of thing. I only eat kosher foods and that I cover my hair. Lots of different ways in which my religion is part of my day-to-day life. Whereas quite a lot of Jews on the circuit, I mean, a small number compared to other groups, but there's not really anyone who lives that lifestyle, but they're still culturally Jewish. They'll still share their heritage, me and the DNA. When
you have this DNA test, what is the, like, are you put into different groups? Is like, one is like I'm just going from like a just different type of Jew, or I'm just sort of trying to work out the scale. Is there a scale that you're more Jewish here or less Jewish, so you have to be in this? Do you know what I mean? Like just
Well, religiously, I think people make their own choices, or they grow up in communities that make that choice for them.
Okay.
So the kind of, I guess, the group I'd be associated with would be what's called modern Orthodox, which is people who are religiously observant but also engaged in the rest of the world. So we have, I was going to say we have normal jobs, but comedy obviously isn't a normal job, but you know what I mean? We do ordinary jobs. We have TVs, we read the news, and we have maybe a wide circle of friends who are from mixed Jewish and non-Jewish backgrounds. That's part of everyday life. And then there are people who live a more insular Jewish life. So they live in areas where predominantly a lot of people are Jewish, where there are loads of kosher bakeries and kosher butchers and kosher supermarkets, as opposed to selecting maybe what you can have from what's around you. And they interact predominantly with other Jewish people because that's who's around. That's the way that their community functions. And then you have people who don't do any of that. So, but you can't tell that from someone's DNA. The DNA is literally what connects. There are markers in your DNA that are your heritage, in the way that it will tell you which part of the world you're from. And because the Jewish community is small, but in a way insular, in that people have tended to broadly marry within it, although nowadays that's maybe a bit less so, that's meant that there are markers in your DNA that show those things up. So the two main strands that people will have heard of are Ashkenazi, which is people of Eastern European Jewish heritage in a more recent basis. Obviously, way back when, we all had Middle Eastern heritage, but over the years the community has been spread around the world for lots and lots of reasons, many of them not very nice. So if you have Ashkenazi heritage that is essentially European, and if you have Sephardi, it's broadly speaking Spanish, Portuguese, North African, Middle Eastern, and Middle Eastern is often known as well as Mizrahi heritage. So you might see that come up on somebody's DNA. And I think the DNA testing is a fascinating subject.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry,
people find loads of stuff out about themselves. I think there's been quite a few people who found they don't have the parentage that they expected to have, and that sort of thing.
Wow. I mean, I was just very interested in that. It's like, wow, a DNA test it's like for a club of what part of the club am I actually from, and where should I be? Okay, right. It's fascinating. Like you get a card, you go like platinum, gold, and bronze, silver and bronze sort of, Jew card. I don't know. It's like, so is it nothing to do with, is in like you don't want to marry anyone that could potentially be, because you're so spread out, could be related to you?
I think that's a bit harder to happen now in most communities, except for maybe in some of the very small Hasidic communities which kind of keep to their own community for that sort of thing. But even so, it's really common for religious Jews to have genetic testing before they commit to marriage. And even, secular Jews often do it because there are certain medical conditions and whatever which are more prevalent because it's a small community that lived in isolated pockets over periods of time. So there are certain a bit like sickle cell anemia is specific to a community. That's exactly. There are certain conditions like Tay-Sachs disease, which is not a common condition, but it's more prevalent in Ashkenazi Jews. So if you're from a very religious background, the normal thing would be to have genetic testing before you got engaged to ensure whether you're like to find out if you're carriers or whatever. But I've not heard of people using the DNA testing for that. I think it's more just when people are curious about their ancestry and their history, so people who are interested in the genealogy aspect of it. Also because the Jews from Spain through the Spanish Inquisition had to forcibly convert, and also at periods of Russian history had to forcibly convert to Christianity. So people do sometimes find, if they have heritage from those countries, that they have like quite strong Jewish DNA, even if they've been brought up with a broadly Christian family for a few generations.
Who doesn't want to know about your family history? What happened along the way.
It's not funny, but it is interesting.
No, of course, yeah. So yeah, well, that's great. Well, thank you for explaining to me. I'm just very intrigued by the whole thing. It was great. Actually, we'll go back to the very beginning, right? Were you a performer I guess you were a performer because you're directing and stuff as well. Were you performing in school?
I did perform in school. I think the first time I performed on stage was when I was about 5.
Wow.
I was always in choirs and in school shows, and where I grew up in Essex, it was very normal to do some kind of after school activity that involved performance. And I think I did ballet, tap and disco at various times. You were allowed to do that then because it was the 70s. Yeah. And so it was cool. I was in community theatre productions and that kind of thing all the time that I was growing up. I played in bands, I used to play guitar, and I wrote songs. So I was very into performance. Cool. And then
I've got one question for you. Sorry.
Oh, go for it.
What was the name of your first band?
First band, I can remember everyone who was in it, but I can't remember for the life of me.
Don't worry. Okay, sorry, I just had to know.
I remember it had an irritating name.
Great.
And I was in a band much later. I was in a kind of girl band, an Orthodox Jewish women-only girl band. So not only women in the group, but we performed to women-only audiences because very religious Jews don't perform to mixed audiences. A couple of the girls in the band who were very strict about that. So we performed on the women-only, Jewish women-only music circuit in the UK. You'd think that was quite a small group of people who would come to that. But we did some really big shows. Like, I think the biggest was about 800 people.
Wow. Amazing. That's
we were called Kol Sheva, which means the voice of 7 in Hebrew.
Kol Sheva. Brilliant.
Kol Sheva. We were a vocal harmony group, and we did little actions and dances. And
do you have an album? Do you have an album that you made?
No. Well, we don't have an album, but one of our songs is on an American album of contemporary Jewish women's music. So somewhere out there in America exists a recording of a song which was written by myself and Ruth Bloch, who was in the group and also the musical director of the group. So we wrote quite a few of the songs together that we performed. Excellent. And actually in my show, It's No Job for a Nice Jewish Girl, I talk about being in that group and I sing part of that song in the show, which is just, it's really nice because it's a nice memory. But yeah, so I was very young when I started performing, but my family was very academic, and it wasn't that I was discouraged, but it was never part of the conversation that this is a viable career. I didn't ever think of pursuing it professionally. I think in my heart of hearts, I would have liked to have been a musical comedian, I think, at that point in time. I loved Victoria Woods, and I was like an obsessive fan, and I loved the Comedy Store. And I think even before I was legally old enough to go in, I certainly went there a few times to watch the improv there, and all of that meant so much to me. And I think my heart of hearts is what I wanted to do. I didn't even bring it to the forefront of my mind because it wasn't really a thing. Even though my aunt, she's in the music industry, she's sort of, I think she was perceived as someone who's done something very extreme by taking that path. So it never seemed like a thing for me. And then I went a completely different route. I got married very young. I was 20. To the same husband that I'm with now, so it's worked out okay. Had a kid straight away. I'd had a really, really terrible time at school. So at that point in time, what I really wanted to do is find a job where I could support young people who were struggling at school. And so I did various different things to kind of prepare myself for that. So I trained a bit in art therapy. I did a certificate in art therapy, and then I trained as a person-centered therapist. I worked on a crisis helpline. I did further training in psychodynamic therapy. So I had like a lot of these skills, and I'd done a gap year abroad, a scheme in Israel where it was part on a kibbutz, part studying, and I had the chance of doing work experience working with really challenging young people there. So I sort of had all these different things in my toolkit. I didn't have a university degree. I didn't have A-levels. I had a bit of one A-level because I was a truant and you know, as I said, a difficult time at school. So I didn't have lots of qualifications, but I had a lot of experience. And off the back of that, I got a job working with young people. It kind of developed from there. I worked in school delivering like informal education programs, and then once I had sort of more therapy training, I started working in pupil referral units, and I did that for a long time. So essentially in social work, and I ended up running a department in one of the biggest pupil referral units in the country. What I guess you could describe as a pastoral care department. The job title is school home liaison. So it's a kind of unique role because you're between social services and education, and your role is to actually advocate for the families and the young people who've been excluded from school. So I worked a lot with very hardcore offenders, like young people and their families, often on a number of occasions were also very serious offenders, and also worked a lot with substance misuse, young people and or family members who had quite serious drug or and or alcohol issues. And I did that for a really, really long time. And then I left it all for the theatre, darling.
Wow. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, like you seems like you've paid off your karmic debt to be able to pursue a career of narcissism, isn't it, really? Because comedy is narcissistic, right? You're like, I've done all this. I love the fact that you've done all the good work at the beginning and then went to the dark side.
Well, I hope so. I hope someone's keeping a tally up there of all my good things. But on the other hand, you know, was it really altruistic if I was being paid for it? That's the argument we can have. It was an interesting decision. I think it was quite a shocking decision to a lot of people to say, yeah, this has all been very nice, but I'm directing a show next week. For a few years, I'd been working on the side with a theatre company. Like I'd kind of gone back to that through dance and through singing, and I'd ended up part of this women-only theatre company. It was a Jewish company, and I ended up directing some of their stuff and writing some of the songs for them and dealing with their sets and props, because when you do community theatre, when you're young, you have to do a bit of everything. Like you can't be a diva and say, well, I'm not going to schlep that box across the stage. You have to be able to turn your hand to anything. So I'm a bit of a jack of all trades. So I was working with this company, and then people started to say to me, well, could you maybe help us with this, because we're doing another thing, we saw you on that, can you help us with that? And my friend Ruth, who I mentioned before, she and I were both kind of a bit dissatisfied with the things that we were doing. Like I loved my job with the PRU, but what I found very difficult was some of the decisions made by the authority that we just had to kind of agree with when I felt that wasn't in the best interest of the child or the family. And it was often a financial decision. And it got to the point where some of those higher up decisions were really problematic for me in terms of feeling like they were actually quite punitive maybe to the families, and often quite detrimental, and then make things worse in the long run. And they didn't sit very well in kind of my guts. It got to the point where I just reached a bit of a crossroads where I was being offered work as a singer, sort of musical theatre performer, and as a director and a writer. At the same time, I had this very demanding full-time job. What happened was, actually, we had an Ofsted inspection at the unit where I worked. And the inspection was focusing on my area of work, particularly, because why wouldn't it? The results came out that we'd moved, I think, from good to excellent or something like it. It was a really nice jump and it was really wonderful, with the only criticism being that the person who was heading that department didn't have any formal qualifications in that field. So the borough was advised to help me to obtain a qualification, and we looked into it, and they were willing to sponsor me to do a master's in social work, because I could skip the BA based on my experience. But it would come with golden handcuffs of me then staying a further 3 years working for them, which I think is probably fair. But it suddenly made me realise, do I want to stay, or do I want to try something else? And then I was involved at the same time, Winter, I was involved in a case which was quite troubling in terms of the decisions that were taken out of my hands, and it had a really quite poor outcome, and that was weighing on my mind. And then I found out I was on the wrong pay scale, because I'd worked if you work in the UK in different, actually I don't know if it's the whole UK, maybe it's just England, but if you go from local authority job to local authority job, there's your pay scale follows you, and they'd missed a jump in that somehow. And I kind of was owed, I think, about 5 to 6 months salary in back pay that had accumulated over the many years. And I'd never had a nest egg before that I could use as a springboard to try something different, because I was always working quite hand to mouth to, pay our bills. My husband and I paid everything together. So I suddenly thought, well, if ever I was going to try something else, this is the moment when I can have when I've got enough rent for the next 6 months or whatever. And I sort of took the money and handed in my notice the same day, and I said, I'm leaving at Christmas. It's been great. And I did a big speech to everybody about everything I'd learned from the students and everything I'd learned from the experience. That was me out of the door. And Ruth and I set up this production company with the idea being that we wanted to help people have positive experiences of performance, or whatever the art form that we were going to work with them on, art, writing, music, whatever, photography, whatever it might be, to have a positive experience of that, and also to help us to decide where we wanted to go next. So ultimately, after a year, we kind of parted ways in terms of that production company, although we still work together on and off. And all the photos, by the way, you've admired, she's taken virtually all of those, because she became a photographer. So all the really good pictures of me, all the pictures of my flyers, all taken by her, Ruth Bloch. I decided I wanted to focus more on theatre, but that year was very valuable, because we got to experiment ourselves and see where our strengths lay. And we did it through workshops with schools, workshops with adults, and it was interesting. We both had a lot of experience without qualifications. And then after that, I realised I really wanted to write and direct. And so I shadowed people, and I would say to people, I'll work for you for nothing. I just want to see how you do things, because I knew I had an instinct, but I wanted to learn how much of that is practical in the real world, and how does it work when you have real human beings that you're doing that with. And I volunteered to do loads of stuff. I was very involved with an organisation called Displa, which supports the work of neurodiverse creatives, of which I'm one, and I did loads of directing and script development with them, which was brilliant. That's kind of how it all came about. Just I worked and worked and worked. That's how I have so many credits in, I guess, a relatively short amount of time, across maybe 15 years, because those first few years I said yes to everything so that I'd learn how to do whatever it was.
Great. That's great. It's just I can hear the energy in you. It's brilliant. I'm I love it. It's brilliant. It's just it's like you're plugged in. I love that. It's brilliant.
I feel like I'm being really waffly. So I'm glad you're finding it energetic.
I'm absolutely loving it. It's just I don't. The questions I want to ask now just seem paltry, and what you just told me is wonderful.
Ask away.
Okay, well we'll go back to your insomnia. Do you think? I mean, so your insomnia really sounds like it's more of a blessing rather than a curse.
It depends. I am really tired. I'd love to go to sleep. And also because my husband's one of those people that can lie down and close his eyes and fall asleep. And I don't know if I've ever done that in my whole life. And some nights, if I can't sleep and I'm really exhausted and I see him do that, it brings out the feelings of murder in me. I mean, he's lucky that I love him. That's all I can say, because it would be a fine balance otherwise. Yeah, there's pros and cons. I mean, I've wondered a few times if I might have ADHD or something like that, because I have other neurodiversity that wasn't diagnosed when I was at school. So it's eminently possible that I think all my friends, if they were listening now, would probably just be nodding, going, yes, of course you have. You know, sometimes it can be very hard to focus, or I'm focusing too much. My family always said that when I was writing plays, you know, I've written a lot of plays and I've had 2 which were thankfully particularly successful. And when I wrote things like that, they take my brain away from absolutely everything. When I'm writing an actual show, like an actual hour's show, although the content will be based a bit on sets I've been doing in clubs, when it comes to putting it together, I have a kind of theatrical brain in terms of how I process that, and I'm impossible to live with. When I was writing plays, I'd just be with the characters the whole time, and people could talk to me. Even if I replied, I had no idea. There was apparently I get a particular look on my face, and then they know that. I think one of my kids described it as when you look like that, we know that in your head somebody else is having a completely different conversation, and we're not even there. So great. Sometimes it's too little focus or too much focus, maybe. But I do wish I could sleep a bit more. I think that would be healthier.
When you were talking about having a difficult time in school, was it to do with the neurodivergence? Is that what was the issue in school? If you don't mind me prying into that.
I don't mind you prying. It was a mixture of things. I think I went to 2 secondary schools, and in the first one I was bullied, and then I was changed. So when it came out that I was being bullied, which was halfway through the second year of secondary school, I was moved to a different school, and I think I'm not going to at all blame my parents for this, because these were different times, you know, and things work differently to how they work now. Because I think now when things like that happen, there's a whole process and procedure, and you have mentors on the way out of the first school, you have mentors to help you transition into the second school, and all of that. But none of that existed then. In the same way that I have dyscalculia, which is like maths dyslexia, that wasn't a thing anybody knew about or understood. So I was just given lots of extra help with maths in the end of primary school, beginning of secondary school, from a tutor who was never going to be able to teach me, but I couldn't learn the way that people taught at that point in time. There were various things that were kind of, I guess, neurological barriers to my learning. After the bullying, I was changed to a different school, and I think the school and I weren't a good fit. So that's one element of it. And the other element of it is that no one had dealt with the trauma of what happened to me, that no one had, in a way, I felt like I was the one who was punished, because everyone else got to stay in my old school. And I was moved away to a new school in a new area, and I didn't know people. I sort of knew 1 or 2 people, but I didn't have like a group of friends. And I came in at a time like midway through the year, so everyone else had been there. There was a lot of people who'd even been to the same primary school, like the feeder primary school to that school. So there were things that I just was always on my back foot about, and I didn't settle. And so initially, I dealt with that by trying to be a model student and being as perfect as I could be and keeping below the radar. But I became, I think, very angry and very resentful. Looking back on it now, having had therapy and things like that in my later life, I guess I also wanted to test those boundaries, because in my last school, I was the victim, but I was the one who was essentially kicked out. That's how it felt to me. So I suppose a bit of me wanted to see what happens in this school, the second school, if you don't conform. So, you know, I was very loud, and I was quite argumentative, and part of that was, again, as I say, not being a good fit for the ethos of that school. But also I began to truant quite significantly, and no one cared. Like, no one noticed, no one mentioned it. They didn't phone my parents to say I wasn't in school. I suspect because they thought that the classroom was a lot quieter without me in it. And you know, can't argue with that. That would have been true. But also because my friend at the time, her family was quite significant in that school and donated a lot of money and things like that. And I think they felt they couldn't get me in trouble in isolation of her. So they and I know that's the case, because the head at one point told me, you know, if you weren't always out with that particular girl, then you'd be in really big trouble. And I think I said something like, well, you know, you can't touch me then. And I walked out of her office.
You're like an
didn't come back
untouchable.
for a few days.
You were like,
and not one phone call home. Whereas now, of course, they would have immediately, you know, you're not in school by 9:15. They've called your parents and the police are out trying to bring you in. So it was a very different time. And so it was allowed to perpetuate. A lot of comics have issues around their self-esteem and their confidence, whatever. And that really did kind of perpetuate those feelings in me, because I felt like I really wasn't worth anybody's bother. You know, I didn't have good attention. I didn't have bad attention. I was just not interesting person.
So you sounds like you were like you were like in the mafia kind of thing. Like, hey, look, I'm connected. You can't touch me. Yeah, that's what it is, right?
I definitely had that vibe.
Wow. But like, it sounds like you've been through all that, and also with the art therapy as well, and all the other things that you've been helping with like, you know, kids who have got substance abuse issues and parental issues like that. It sounds like directing is the perfect job for you, isn't it?
Well, I guess that's what I've been doing all the time.
Yeah.
You know, you're not wrong. Like, I've just been helping people to recognise their story and decide what their journey is and how they want to end it. I suppose that is the big similarity. It wasn't always quite as funny, if I'm honest. But some of it was. Like, my first play that I wrote was called Staff Room, or my first professional play that I wrote was called Staff Room, and it was set in the staff room of a pupil referral unit, or a behaviour support unit, I think is what I called it for the show, to be a bit clearer, because not everyone knows all the terminology. It did contain some of the funniest stories that happened during that time, and it was a comedic show. Like, it was, I think I would describe my two main shows, that one and the second one, which was called An Insomniac's Guide to Ambulances. Right. I think they're both dark comedies, but the darkness comes a lot from those experiences, and from some of the stories in both of them came from working with the families in the pupil referral units, but also, you know, your story is also still you. I'm in those words as well, and my experience as a young person in education doing badly and then getting into trouble outside of school as well, that is also part of that journey for the script and for the audience.
Of course. Wow, that's amazing. Like, you know, it's wonderful the fact that it's a rich life you live when you're helping other people, as well as, you know, kind of not therapizing, but working through your own issues as well at the same time. Definitely. Right?
And now we all do that on stage, don't we? Exactly. Stand-ups, you know, essentially that's how we're working out our bits and bobs. And my stand-up's quite, I think, because I'm a sort of smiley, friendly person, people often don't realise my stand-up is quite confrontational, and it's very issue-led. But because my manner is storytelling, I think that people often are kind of lulled into a false sense of security, because I talk a lot about anti-Semitism and about how people approach me with regards to the subject of Israel, and about how people treat people in education. And it's all there, and it's, if you look for it, it's all very blatant. But I think when it comes with a joke, it's an interesting way to be able to talk about your really big issues without it being so terrifying to people as if you shouted it in a confrontational way. Yeah,
you've really sugared the pill, Rachel. You really have. I want to be respectful of your time. I don't want to keep you any too long. So I'm going to ask you just a few more questions, and we'll wrap up. But right, you've performed to over 4,500 people. Is that right?
I think my biggest audience now is 6,000 something that I did in one go. That was insane. That was for an event called Hanukkah in the Square, so which is a Hanukkah celebration in Trafalgar Square that used to be an annual thing until the whole pandemic. So I'm hoping that it will come back, if not this year, then next year. So for the last couple of years, I was the resident host for that, and it's in Trafalgar Square, so it's open to anybody who is there in central London, plus people who've come specially. And it's a big, I guess it felt like, I imagine, playing Wembley Stadium, because I'm I'm a tiny person on a massive stage with screens and that huge audience, and that was really, a massive buzz. I could pretend to be cool about it, be like, it was just a gig, and in some ways it was, because you know yourself, like if there's a room with 3 people and a dog, or if there's 300 people in a theatre, you still, once you're on the stage, it's the same job. But it was like, but standing there and sort of, I want to stand at the front and be like, hello Wembley. It was exciting and fun to do.
How old were you when you did your first comedy set?
Okay, so the first time I performed any kind of comedy I'd written myself was when I was 19, and it was so terrible that even when I talk about it, I can feel my hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was just so terrible, and it was while I was on kibbutz, like I mentioned earlier. And so I was with all my friends, and there's a Jewish holiday called Purim, which is actually just passed a couple of weeks ago, where it's a bit like a Mardi Gras type thing. It's lots of celebration, and you do fun stuff, and it's normal for communities to produce some kind of show or something for other people in the community and that sort of thing. So the kibbutz did an event like that where people could perform, and myself and a few friends performed something I'd written, like a sketch that I'd written, but it was sketch comedy in Hebrew, which was very much our second language by quite a long way. So it must have sounded like the English policeman who can't speak French in Hello Hello, if you know the character I mean. And it was about, and I don't know why, but I wrote it about Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and everything about it was so cringe, like really, honestly, Winter, I mean, I'm so thankful. I'm talking to you. I'm so thankful there weren't iPhones then. You know, can you imagine if that existed? There's no footage, and no one has to remember apart from me. And it went so well that it was like 20 years before I gave it another go, more or less. But just trying to think of like my first gig once I really invested in comedy. And I'm pretty sure, I mean, I'd been working in gigs and I'd been comparing, but my first one where I was like, now I'm going to be a stand-up, I'm not just going to be someone who does other things in the comedy field and occasionally says stuff, was probably just one of those terrible open mic nights with 18 acts on, all doing 5 minutes, everyone hating each other, no audience, no one actually listening to you because they're all like focusing on their own stuff. Pretty sure it was one of those, and I just thought, this is really horrendous, but I really love it, I think.
Do you remember? Okay, do you remember your first joke you wrote? Like the one, like that's a great joke.
The first one where I thought that I really loved that joke.
Or the first one you wrote before you're like, okay, I'm taking this to the stage. This is
because when I was a kid, I constantly wrote really terrible jokes that weren't funny.
Go on.
You know, like, why is a tomato because it is type jokes. I was always doing that. And actually one of my little nieces, she's always telling those. She had Philip Simon did this amazing kids joke book for charity, and I got it for her, and now she tells jokes and they're all diabolical, but I'm proud of her. So I don't remember the very first joke, but I think I've got a few which whenever I tell them I think, actually, I really like that. That really makes me still laugh. See, I knew I would start coughing. That's hubris. You see what happens when you're too proud of yourself? You get punished by a massive cough. Yeah, I mean, I like that when I come on stage because I wear a headscarf, and I often say to people, I have to point out that it's not a pirate thing, it's a Jew thing. I'm not a hoi, I'm oy vey. They're very, very different. I'm just one of the blonde ones who walks amongst you, not trying to steal your treasure. I quite like that joke, and I like it because it's a way of introducing myself, but also that is a way of confronting people's concept that Jews are money driven when I'm saying that I'm not. So that's probably a great example of what I was saying to you before, that I quite like to confront a stereotype and do it in a way where people don't realise that that's what I'm saying. Yeah, maybe the joke, I've got a joke about how, you know, Jewish people are very obsessed with food, and my family are equally obsessed with food, and you know, whenever we travel, we have to discuss the food. That's the main subject. So like my sister, she went on an anniversary trip with her husband to the beautiful city of Prague, and when they came back, we all went and had a dinner together to hear about the trip, and so I said, how was it? And her reply was something like, well, you know, when we got to the airport, we ate our croissants we bought from this bakery, and when we got on the plane, we ate our bagels that we bought from that bakery, and then when we got to the hotel, it was great, there was a minibar so we could put our cold meat in there that we bought from home. And then you hear like every meal before you even get a sniff of the fact that they saw the special clock in the middle of Prague, which I only know exists because I googled what is there to see in Prague. But when I travel, which I do a lot for my work, my family always ask me the same question. They always ask me, how will you manage? And how will you manage as code? It doesn't mean how will you manage, like how will you schlep that massive suitcase up and down their Escher-like steps in Edinburgh, or how will you manage away from your husband and children? Like, how you manage means what will you eat? And I know that because they'll message me on our family WhatsApp 3 times a day to find out what I've eaten. And I've told them they don't have to worry because this is, well, it's 2021 now. So it tells you how long ago it was I was telling that joke. Like I was going to say, it's 2019. It's 2021. They don't have to worry about me because I'm a modern woman. So I've got an app on my phone. The app's called Kosher Near Me. And it tells you pretty much anywhere in the world, the closest place that you can find a kosher sandwich. Basically, it's Grindr for bagels.
Nice.
So I think that was the first one I wrote like that. I thought that's a proper,
Great.
I think that's a proper bit of material with a beginning, middle and end. You know, it had a punchline.
Nice bit. Yeah, it's really nice. I want to ask this question to everyone. You've listened to the podcast a few times. So as a performer, as a comedian, when you're going on stage, what do you see yourself as? It could be a job. It could be a mythical creature, or you could be yourself in a different form, you know? So do you have a model? Did you have a model? Maybe, you know, we'll go through different skins, but do you have any sort of caricature or sort of model that you structured yourself on before or still are?
Well, I'll tell you a true story. A few years ago, I was invited into school. I get invited often into schools to speak to the kids about different aspects of the things that I've done. I went into this primary school to talk to the children in assembly, and when I got to the office, they asked a little boy to show me the way, and so he took my hand, because in those days apparently you could touch people in a appropriate way, I must add. But anyway, so he took my hand, and we're walking along the corridor, and he's like staring at my face and staring at my hands and my wrists, and I can see him staring at the bit of my ankle that he could see between my skirt and my shoes or whatever I was wearing, and kept staring back at my face, and it was really intense. And at the same time, he was sort of jiggling about like from foot to foot, like little boys do when something's really making them buzz. And I said to him, "Oh, are you looking forward to my visit today?" And he said, yes, I'm really looking forward to it. And I said, "Oh, what's made you so excited?" And he said, "They told us you're a chameleon." And I thought that was so gorgeous, because obviously he's misheard the words, but also just the idea that we're people who transform, that we become who we need to become for that story. And through the process, I don't know, as I say, if it's different for someone who's a one-liner comic, but for someone like me who's an observational, anecdotal comedian, and who acts bits out that they're saying or whatever, I think that's quite a good description of the combination of being a comedian and a chameleon, because you're what you need to be in that moment for that audience. And it's a very immediate, present way of thinking. You know, now everyone's big on mindfulness, but actually I don't know when I'm more present really than just then and there, where it's just me and the other people breathing in that space, and we're experiencing that moment together. So I guess a chameleon / comedian.
Great.
And also I still get such a kick out of the fact that my job is that I'm a stand-up comedian. I honestly, if we'd have had yearbooks when I was at school, that would not have been under my photo, you know, that anyone would imagine that. And it's so exciting to me that the dream that I didn't feel I could tell anybody became my reality.
Wow, brilliant. It's a privilege, isn't it?
Totally.
Rachel Creeger, thank you so much for coming on the show. You also, I'll just say one last thing about you. You won best comedy at the Greater Manchester Fringe in 2018.
It was 2017.
Sorry. Yeah.
That's fine. Right. Don't worry, Winter.
I'm just reading this from your website. I'm just saying.
It should say 2017 on there. It didn't say 2018.
It says 2018, yeah. I don't usually argue with my guests. No, I'm Rachel. I'm sorry. It is 2008. But anyway, 2017, you won Best Comedy Award in Greater Manchester Fringe.
That's weird. I need to correct that. I toured in 2018. Yeah, it was as big a shock to me as it is to you. And that was for It's No Job for a Nice Jewish Girl. And it was, I honestly was so surprised by it that this is literally what happened. The organisers of the Fringe have like a big party on the last night, and then they do the award ceremony, and I couldn't go back up. I think I was performing somewhere else. I couldn't go back up for it. So I sent them a text, and I'd become quite friendly with them over the years because I'd taken many theatre shows to the Manchester Fringe, and I'd been kind of involved in it. And then once I started performing, I started going. So I sort of got to know them quite well. So I texted them beforehand and I said, have a brilliant time tonight. I hope it all goes smoothly. And then, I don't know, I went to bed and then I got up to get a glass of water and I saw my phone flashing and there's a text back from one of the two people who run it. I think it was from Michelle. And she said, the whole night was brilliant and you won Best Comedy.
Wow.
And I thought she was having a laugh because I knew she'd be quite drunk by that point because everyone would be. It's a big party. So I just replied, haha, hilarious. You're going to have a massive hangover tomorrow. Yeah. Speak to you soon. And then I went back to sleep. And then in the morning, she texted me again and said, I'm not drunk, that did happen. And I said, don't be ridiculous, I think. And then they had to email me the evidence. And the funny thing was that I directed Ria Lina's show, Dear Daughter, which won it the previous year. Wow. So I kind of stole the crown away from myself in a way, you know, like, because I had it as the director from the year before. But it was, I tell you what, in all seriousness, because I'd performed for the Jewish community for a long time before that in various ways. And then I always just wanted to be a mainstream comic. I wanted to be a gigging comic like all the other comedians. I didn't want to be someone who was only ever in a synagogue hall on a drafty, you know, Sunday evening for a charity event. And not that I'm dissing that, by the way, that is amazing. And I still do those things. But my dream was to be a circuit comic and to win such a kind of mainstream award as an Orthodox Jewish woman felt like the most validating thing ever, because to my knowledge, no one like me has ever won anything like that in this country. And it was just a tremendous thing. And I've been very lucky. I've been nominated for and won a few different things, but that is always going to mean something so special because it felt like we're acknowledging that you're part of this community that I'd always wanted to be a part of.
Yeah. That's great. Rachel, it has been an absolute pleasure to speak to you for the last hour and a bit. Where can we find you?
So you can find me on social media at Rach Creeger, RACHCREEGER, and at Jew Talking without the G for my podcast, Jew Talking to Me with Philip. Please do listen to the podcast. We've got Series 3 launching very soon. So we're about to reveal who all our guests are in the next couple of weeks. So that's very, very exciting. I can't believe we've got 3 series. Yeah. It's amazing. So yeah, that would be lovely. And my website is just my name, rachelcreeger.com, and it will soon be edited to make sure that any awards I might have won show up as the correct date, amongst other things. Also, you can hear me often on BBC London Radio because I do a regular slot with them on the Sonny and Shay show. Brilliant. Well, Rachel, and you know, it's been an absolute pleasure. And when your new show comes out, Pray It Forward. Yeah, I look forward to seeing that as well. You'll be singing around the circuit when all thaws and opens up. Me too. Round the circuit and nice cups of coffee, which is the other place where we've often bumped into each other. Thanks, Rachel. Thank you. Bye. And that was episode 113 with the excellent, such a wholesome human being. What a beautiful answer when I asked her what she felt like when she went on stage. A chameleon. What a beautiful, perfect answer that is. A chameleon. And she's been in a girl band. She's done loads of things. She performed to over 6,000 people. And she also runs, I think, gigs in the Adam and Eve in North London, if you want to go and check her out. Her handle for Instagram and Twitter is at Rach Creeger. That's RACHCREEGER, or rachelcreeger.com on the website. So you can also find her on her podcast, which she co-hosts with Philip Simon, another, I say, brilliant comedian, and that is Jew Talking to Me. So she co-hosts that, and they release podcasts wherever you get good podcasts from. And if you want help structuring your show, Rachel Creeger is the person to speak to, and she can add you to the long list of credits she's got. She's absolutely excellent. She's directed award-winning comedy shows, so go speak to her online. She's an absolute lovely person as well. Such a wholesome individual. So lovely to speak to somebody like that in comedy. But yeah, so that was episode 113. And for June's episode, we've got a very special guest, a Canadian comedian, an absolute just powerhouse of comedy. And I watch his stuff online. He is absolutely excellent. His name is Mike Wilmot. If you don't know him, go and check his stuff out. He is absolutely excellent. Just a really brilliant, grumpy old man. He's just great on stage. I love his stuff. So go and check his stuff out. That is for the June's episode, the last Wednesday of the month. And look, whatever you're doing in June, enjoy it, and hope the weather is nice and warm and we can get out and do some stuff. And look, whatever you're doing, enjoy yourself.
Enjoy June. See you at the end. Mike Wilmot. Brilliant episode. See you then.